Mr. Van Collins, you are currently the president and CEO of the ACEC Washington State Chapter. Previously you had held a key position at Washington's Associated General Contractors, AGC.
Mm-hmm.
You also spearheaded state government affairs and efforts, and you have more than 11 years of experience at AGC. You served in numerous capacities, right, including Southern District Manager, lobbyist, and legislative counsel. Obviously, before entering the construction, this is the very interesting piece. Before entering the construction and engineering industry, you also practiced law, and specifically in private sector, showcasing your legal acumen. And obviously, when we also looked further, it turns out that you studied law, but only after you had your Bachelor of Science in Engineering.
That's correct.
And that's a very, very, very interesting twist. So let's start with that piece. So first of all, what got you into engineering, mechanical in particular, and why did you change your mind later on?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. I think it's a little bit generational. I grew up in the 70s, and we didn't have the internet, and you didn't have the same access to information, in that day and age that kids do today. I actually come from a blue collar family. My dad was an operating engineer, worked in the trades, and so I grew up following dam projects actually when I was a younger child, and so I was around the industry, from the various youngest of ages, and so I always had an affinity for it. And so at that time, it was like I wasn't really probably so slated to the trades, but I did well in school. I did well in science and math, and what's a possible logical extension of that, which is engineering. And I always wanted to kind of maintain the kind of the broadest aspect, that I could. And so mechanical at that time was probably the most diverse discipline and offered the kind of the widest array of possibilities. And so that's why I went into mechanical rather than civil. If I had to do over again, I probably would have gone civil.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm an electrical engineer, so there's nothing against civil. It's just I find myself closer to mechanical if I was to take any other route, to mechanical than civil for some reason. I don't know. I think it's more interesting.
Yeah, I remember Ohm's law and all of it's a little basic.
Exactly, and electromechanical, they kind of overlap at one point in time in some places.
Yeah.
And did you practice mechanical engineering? I mean, after you graduated, or?
For a very short time. I always intended to kind of work for myself. At least that was my belief. The other thing my parents did is when I was 10 years old, they bought a motel. So they were business people. My dad kept working in the trades, but my mom and my brother and I actually grew up running a motel. And so I have this kind of background in business as well, and so the idea of being kind of self-employed was always in the back of my mind. So after I got my degree, I was like, for me, being a technical engineer was probably not where the cards were. I mean, I was good, but it was not where my personal interest was. And by my personal nature, I'm a bit of an extrovert. So, it's like, what do I do with this? And building on an engineering degree was something that was always a great base. And so I was considering an MBA, and I was considering law and being able to use, my engineering background in either one of those arenas. And I chose law. I liked the challenge. I liked the thought process. I'm competitive by my own personal nature, and that certainly is inherent in the practice of law. There's competition both in terms of building your own practice, but then in defending, clients. There's a bit of a, you need to be a little bit of a go-getter to be successful.
What were you working when you practiced, or actually when you studied for law, or you had to quit your job?
I did quit my job. I was able to go full time. I happened to have a very supportive and understanding wife who during those 3 years, and so hopefully she thinks that it was worth her investment. We've been together for 35 years, so so far so good.
That's impressive, and we salute her over here. And Here's the thing. How many years did it take you to finish the law?
It's 3 years.
3 years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then afterwards, you practiced it.
I did. I ended up going to work for a small firm here in Washington, and worked my way up to being a partner fairly quickly. It just so happened that my wife happened to get pregnant with our second child when I turned 40. And it was one of those kind of epiphany kind of time frames. It was a small firm, so it was, you worked a lot of hours and not a lot of time off, and it was a great practice. I had great clients, but from a life kind of standpoint, was there, it was a time where I could look at, is this what I want to do for the next 30 years? And the job with AGC came open, and they actually approached my wife. My wife has a political background, a government affairs background, and she was like, "Oh, this isn't right for me, but maybe it's right for you." And I interviewed without necessarily the intention of pursuing it, but I ended up being sold. And so I did make the career change at that point to, go into association work. And the nice thing was that it was in an arena where I had a very strong background, because both my upbringing and also my training, I was practicing a lot of construction law, a lot of real estate, a lot of construction law at the time.
Is that what AGC does?
AGC is a sister trade association to American Council of Engineering Companies. Associated Contractors is similarly a nationwide kind of federated system where they have in-state chapters, and they provide services and advocacy for general contractors principally, but also subcontractors.
And how long you stayed with AGC?
I was there about 11 years. And
Wow.
And so I had a great affinity for that. I again, the people within this industry in general, I think are, second to none. I mean, I'm talking about my current members at ACEC. I'm talking about the AGC members that I dealt with, the tradespeople that I grew up with. They are result oriented. They tell you what they think. They are, generally speaking, very honest, very caring, although they can, especially the trades folks, can be a little bit rough around the edges, but they are genuine. And I think this is an industry that is the backbone of the country. I really do.
I'm trying to merge both worlds, the law practicing and law world with the engineering world, because these are two completely separate profiles from a mindset perspective and approach to things, right?
It's in the sense of where you use a very linear analysis to analyze an engineering problem. How you analyze a set of facts and the law, and how you apply the law to a set of facts, is the same linear process. So the steps that you go through are exactly the same. The problem is at the end is in the law, you quite often don't have an answer. It's who can make the best argument, who wins out in convincing a jury. And that's where the skill of an attorney comes into play, is ultimately is convincing a trier of fact who is correct, especially in those areas where it's gray. If it's very clear, anybody can, kind of talk about that. Real skill is those that can use facts, can use situations, can use the law to make really cogent arguments.
So it requires some sales, let's say. It requires some sales on top.
And that is the link between law, engineering, and advocacy, which is, like the law, you're taking, in advocacy, you're taking something that quite often is complex. We're in the process of talking about indemnification right now, which is a very complex legal, kind of situation, and we're trying to make what we call the fair indemnification statute in Washington, and many others call it the anti-indemnification law. to make it less ambiguous. And so we're working through that. But to be able to explain legal concepts and how it affects the engineering, profession, it takes the ability to put things in very common parlance. And so how do you take something complex and how do you simplify it and how do you articulate that in a very short time span is a skill set. And that's something that I've been able to really work on over the years.
And that brings me to our next question here. You've worked for, you said 11 years for AGC, primarily, lobbying, and you probably brought a wealth of experience when it comes to government affairs and lobbying with government and passing through certain legislations and laws that help pretty much the whole industry. Can you share some examples where lobbying really was critical in building the case and getting it through?
Sure. Like anything else in life, to be successful is so often about building coalitions. And, AGC back in that time frame and ACEC today does very little on its own. And so you build constituencies, you build alliances, and that is something that really takes the skill of being able to figure out where that common ground is. And so one of the areas which, I'm going back into my time, at least at AGC, where we were very successful and amongst, and it wasn't just AGC, it was many, it was the labor unions and, environmental groups and municipalities and such, which was really to start the roll on getting transportation funded at the state level. And that was a multi-year effort to build out what are the needs, why they're there, trying to convince legislators including our Republican friends, to really look at it as an investment in the needs of the state and an economic investment. And that was really part of it. And then on the other side, when you look at multimodal transportation, that was something that was very important to our Democratic and environmental sector folks. And so it really was putting the right mix and the right combination together. And we were an important voice in that. We weren't certainly the only one, but it was an important one. And Washington is built on that and has been successful in passing multiple transportation packages, since that time.
Speaking of Washington, before we get to Washington, I want to ask you a question. Obviously, you have a thorough experience with this. So could you recall certain instances where the policies or regulations that were accepted or rejected were not the best out there required for the development of a certain industry or a city or whatever? But it was just passed. It got passed just because it had a very powerful lobby behind it, or people who know how to play the game behind it.
Yeah, I mean, it is certainly the case that there's always going to be those situations where you win and you lose, and you live to fight another day. I'm trying to think back in terms of time. There's not been anything that I can really contemplate, from my time at ACEC, so much that we've had something really negative hit, other than probably the one that stands out the most is in terms of business and occupations tax. There have been increases in the business and occupations tax at the state level, and it is something that has happened before. It's been rolled back. It's been increased again. It's been rolled back, and it really is trying to articulate why, when you tax the gross revenues of a firm, how that detrimentally hits not just the firm, but the broader prospects of development and what it's going to do ultimately to the economic situation of the state. Yeah, you might raise taxes and view it as a stopgap, but the long-term implications is a downward, suppression of economic growth. So,
usually, is it a battle between different lobbying groups trying to get,
Oh, it always is. Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that, this is it's kids versus concrete. It is social services, education on the one hand. At least this is the way it's articulated. I don't view it that way. I'm just saying this is the way it gets couched. When money gets tight, it becomes a question of funding, those kind of programs versus funding capital programs. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to find dedicated sources for capital funding, and to make sure that in those hard times that those funding sources are not impacted in any great manner. In the past, we had a public works, what we call the Public Works Trust Fund, the Public Works Assistance Account, and that was rated. And those monies went to support especially smaller municipalities with sewers and bridge repairs and water projects and the like, and which were critically important to these smaller jurisdictions. But when we had the downturn, after 2008, those revenue sources were redirected, and it's just been more recently that we're starting to see the ability to kind of move those revenues back to where they were once, and make that fund much more healthy than it has been in the last 10 years.
And these funds usually, what's the source of these funds?
That has a mixed barrel of sources. Traditionally, it was like the real estate excise tax and various charges and fees. And I'm trying to remember if that's been broadened out more recently. I believe it has, but off the top of my head, I can't recall. But the main thing was that they were redirected. They were redirected to other uses. And so
who decides on this direction and distribution of the
state legislature?
Legislator.
They're balancing the budget. One of the things that Washington has is a balanced budget requirement. And so they, when they pass their budget, and they pass a biennial budget every 2 years, and then in the off year, they do a supplemental budget, but it is always with that mindset that it has to be balanced.
And I'm assuming that this is where the role of the lobbyist kicks in, right? Trying to kind of channel where this funding goes in terms of the policies, regulations, projects that you guys have, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You try to articulate why, this is of need and how it benefits the state. And many legislators get that, and that's up on their priority list, and how they view the role of government, and other ones have different priorities.
It's very interesting. And, you transitioned from AGC to ACEC at a certain point in time. I'm assuming it's recent, just on this presidency term, or
9 years ago. Yeah.
9 years ago. Again, I wouldn't say a major turn, but it's probably a natural kind of evolution from where you were at AGC to ACEC. But what brought you into ACEC? Why do you think that you could add value there?
My predecessor, Bill Garrity, was retiring. And so he was looking to help the board, the ACEC board, find a possible replacement. And he and I had known each other because of my role at AGC. He was involved in state government affairs, as the president CEO of ACEC at the time, and he and I were acquainted, and he knew of my background. So he knew I was an engineer and an attorney, and advocacy has always been a very important element of what the, shall we say, the qualifications of the present CEO of ACEC Washington have been. He approached me and he said, "Have you ever thought about, possibly coming to ACEC?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't. It's not something I was looking for. I was very satisfied, but the idea of kind of going full circle back to engineering, and then running from a staff perspective, being the lead staff person in a trade organization, was very appealing." So for multiple reasons, I said, "Sure, let's talk." And I had a great rapport with the board and who I interviewed with, and it was just a very natural fit.
And,
it wasn't anything against AGC. It was pro ACEC.
And how long has it been so far?
I said 9 years.
9
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Very interesting.